I killed an innocent woman, and I've been dying inside ever since. My name's Mike Chen, I'm 45, and I used to be the kind of bodyguard who never drew his weapon in anger. 22 years of keeping people alive without taking a life. That record ended at 2:47 p.m. in a downtown restaurant when I put 2 bullets in Sarah Mitchell's chest, thinking she was reaching for a gun. She was reaching for her phone to call her babysitter about picking up her 4-year-old daughter Emma. Here's what nobody tells you about killing someone by mistake. Your body keeps working, your heart keeps beating, but something inside you just stops. The worst part? I was good at my job. I was fucking great at it. Protected senators, CEOs, foreign diplomats, never lost a client, never even came close. Built my whole identity around being the guy who kept people safe. But that Tuesday, everything I thought I knew about myself, about right and wrong, about who the real threats were, it all went to hell in 3 seconds. They tell me it wasn't my fault, that I followed protocol, that anyone would have made the same call. The investigation cleared me, called it justifiable homicide in defense of my client. But they don't know what I know now about that day, about my client David Harmon, about how I was played like a goddamn fiddle by people I trusted. Sarah's last words keep echoing in my head. He paid to kill me. And the thing that keeps me up at night, checking locks and jumping at shadows, obsessively scanning parking lots and restaurant entrances? I'm still not sure who I can trust anymore, including myself. Because when you realize your whole career was built on a lie, when the system you served uses you as a weapon against the innocent, you start questioning everything. Every instinct, every decision, every person who claims they're on your side. I used to sleep like a baby, confident in my purpose. Now I check my backseat every time I get in my car, and I still can't tell you if that's paranoia or survival instinct. Before that Tuesday from hell, I had what you'd call a good life. Not great, not perfect, but solid in a way that let me sleep through the night. Elena Vasquez at Apex Security had been sending me premium clients for 8 years. Tech executives, oil barons, the occasional celebrity going through a messy divorce. I lived in a decent 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, had a routine that worked like clockwork, and enough money in the bank to sleep well without checking my account balance. My ex-wife Linda used to say I was married to the job, and she wasn't wrong, but at least the job never cheated on me or left me for her yoga instructor like she did. The work was clean, professional, predictable. Stand close, scan crowds, think 3 steps ahead, go home, repeat. No gray areas, no moral dilemmas, just clear protocols and steady paychecks. I'd partnered with Tommy Reeves on dozens of jobs over the years. He was like a brother to me, the kind of guy who'd take a bullet and crack jokes while the paramedics patched him up. We had this rhythm, this unspoken trust that comes from years of having each other's backs. When David Harmon's people called about a 6-week detail, it seemed like just another routine assignment. Tech startup CEO, some vague threats from disgruntled investors, standard corporate drama that rich people face when they step on the wrong toes. The pay was excellent, almost double our usual rate. The client seemed reasonable during our initial meeting, and Harmon had that Silicon Valley confidence that made you feel like you were protecting someone genuinely important. He was articulate, charming even, with the kind of casual authority that comes from building something from nothing. I remember thinking this might be the job that finally let me put enough aside to buy that cabin upstate I'd been dreaming about for years. Funny how you can be so completely wrong about everything, about people, about situations, about your own judgment, and not even know it until it's too late to matter. The first crack in my perfect professional world came exactly 3 weeks into the Harmon detail. We were at Meridian, this upscale restaurant in Midtown where Harmon liked to hold his business dinners. You know the type: white tablecloths, pretentious waitstaff, $100 steaks that taste like any other steak but cost 5 times more. I was positioned near the kitchen entrance, Tommy stationed by the front door, standard protective formation we'd used countless times before. That's when I first noticed her, Sarah Mitchell, one of the waitresses working the main dining room. She kept glancing at our table, not the way service staff usually look at VIP customers with that practiced deference, but nervous, almost frightened. There was something in her eyes, a kind of desperate recognition that made my professional instincts twitch. When she approached to refill our water glasses, her hands were shaking so badly I thought she might drop the crystal pitcher. The tremor was subtle, but after 22 years of reading people's body language for signs of threat, I noticed these things. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly, leaning slightly away from the table so Harmon couldn't hear. She looked at me like I'd just thrown her a lifeline in stormy waters, then caught herself and nodded quickly. Fine, just tired. Long shift. But her eyes said something completely different. They said help me. They said I'm in danger. They said please see what's happening here. After she walked away, I mentioned it to Harmon, keeping my voice casual. That waitress seems spooked about something. Might be worth noting. He barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through emails with that practiced indifference rich people perfect when dealing with what they consider lesser beings. Service industry drama, he said dismissively. Probably worried about her tips or dealing with some personal nonsense. Something about his complete dismissal bothered me deeply, the way he didn't even glance in Sarah's direction, like he already knew exactly who I was talking about without needing to look. That night, I found myself lying awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why a waitress would be scared of water glasses and why my client seemed so utterly unconcerned about someone acting strange around him. It was the first time in years I'd questioned my read on a situation, the first hairline crack in the confidence I'd built over decades of keeping people safe. Earned about someone acting strange around him. It was the first time in years I'd questioned my read on a situation, the first hairline crack in my confidence. I tried like hell to shake off that feeling about Sarah, told myself I was overthinking the whole situation. That's what happens when you've been in personal security too long. You start seeing threats lurking in coffee cups and suspicious behavior and nervous smiles from tired wait staff. Your paranoia becomes a professional hazard, making you question every interaction, every glance, every slight deviation from normal behavior. Tommy noticed I was more distracted than usual and called me on it during our morning security briefing at the hotel. You're wound tighter than a piano wire, Mike. What's eating you? I mentioned the waitress, how she seemed genuinely scared, not just tired or having a bad day. He shrugged it off exactly the same way Harmon had, with that casual dismissal that made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Maybe she's got an abusive boyfriend at home, maybe she's behind on rent and worried about getting evicted. Not a problem unless she poses a direct threat to the client, which she obviously doesn't. Elena said virtually the same thing when I called the Apex office later that day. Chin, you're being paid to protect David Harmon, not to counsel stress service workers or play amateur therapist. Stay focused on actual security concerns. But I couldn't let it go, couldn't stop thinking about the fear in Sarah's eyes. Started paying closer attention to her during our subsequent restaurant visits, watching her body language, noting her reactions. She'd observe Harmon when she thought no one was looking, and there was something in her expression that bothered me, not the usual fear of a celebrity or powerful person that service workers sometimes display, but recognition. Like she knew something specific about him that the rest of us didn't. Something that made her genuinely afraid for her safety. When I mentioned this observation to Harmon directly, he got visibly irritated for the first time since I'd known him, his usual charm slipping for just a moment. Mike, I appreciate your thoroughness, I really do, but you're creating problems where none exist. That woman is nobody special. She serves food and clears tables. Focus on actual threats to my safety, not imaginary conspiracies involving restaurant staff. The way he emphasized, nobody, made my skin crawl, but I pushed the feeling down, convinced myself I was being paranoid. Just a middle-aged bodyguard seeing conspiracies in everyday interactions, letting his imagination run wild in the absence of real danger. The signs kept accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon, each one individually explainable but collectively forming a pattern I was too stubborn or too scared to acknowledge. During our 4th week on the detail, I overheard Sarah during her cigarette break behind the restaurant, speaking into her phone in hushed, urgent tones that carried the unmistakable weight of fear. I can't keep pretending I didn't see anything, she was saying, voice trembling. I know what I witnessed that night. The briefcase, the cash, all of it. Yes, I'm scared as hell, but people need to know what's really happening. When she spotted me standing near the service entrance, she hung up immediately, her face going white as fresh snow. The terror in her eyes was so raw, so genuine, that it made my chest tighten with the professional alarm I'd learned to trust over the years. That same week, I noticed Harmon getting more calls from blocked members, conversations he'd take outside the restaurant or in private rooms, speaking in low tones that suggested urgency and secrecy. His entire demeanor had shifted too, less of that casual Silicon Valley confidence, more quick glances over his shoulder, constantly checking his watch, fingers drumming nervously on tables. The detail was supposed to be precautionary, routine corporate security, but something felt actively dangerous now, like we were sitting on a powder keg waiting for someone to light the fuse. Then came the envelope that changed everything. Sarah slipped it to me when she was clearing our dessert plates, her hand trembling so violently I thought she might collapse right there. Inside was a handwritten note on restaurant stationery. "He's not who you think he is. Meet me after my shift tonight. Please. A little girl needs her mom to come home safe." My blood went cold reading those words, understanding finally that this wasn't paranoid rambling or restaurant employee drama. This was someone genuinely terrified, reaching out to the only person with a gun who might actually listen and believe her story. But I hesitated, and that hesitation haunts me more than the shooting itself. 22 years of protocol screamed at me not to get involved in client business, not to meet with potential security risks, not to compromise my professional position. That moment of following rules instead of trusting my instincts cost Sarah Mitchell her life, and I'll carry that failure until the day I die. The day that split my life into before and after, the moment everything I thought I understood about right and wrong got blown to pieces along with Sarah Mitchell's chest. We were back at Meridian for what Harmon had described as a crucial investor meeting. Though I noticed he seemed more nervous than usual, checking his phone obsessively and barely touching his expensive salmon. I'd been wrestling with Sarah's desperate note for 2 full days, planning to approach her after her shift to finally hear whatever terrifying truth she was carrying. The restaurant was bustling with its typical lunch crowd, business executives, wealthy tourists, people who could afford $30 appetizers without checking their bank balance. Tommy was positioned by the main entrance. I was scanning the dining room from my usual spot near the kitchen. Everything felt routine until it suddenly wasn't. That's when I saw him moving through the crowd with predatory purpose, a man in a dark jacket, maybe 40. Average height, but something about his movement pattern screamed professional. His right hand was inside his coat, and 22 years of training made my muscles tense before my brain even processed what I was seeing. Everything slowed down to that crystal clear moment when training takes over from thought. I stepped toward Harmon, hand moving instinctively toward my weapon, when the man's jacket fell open and I saw the gun barrel catching the restaurant's ambient lighting. "Gun!" I shouted, drawing my pistol as the man raised his weapon with practiced efficiency. But he wasn't aiming at Harmon like I'd expected. He was pointing toward the kitchen entrance, and I realized with growing horror that Sarah was walking out with a loaded tray, moving directly into his line of fire. The next 3 seconds destroyed everything I thought I knew about justice, about protection, about the difference between good guys and bad guys. The gunman fired first, a clean shot aimed at Sarah's center mass. I fired at the gunman, my first shot catching him in the shoulder. But in the chaos of screaming diners diving under tables, I lost track of angles and ricochets and background. My second shot, the one that was supposed to end the threat and save an innocent life, caught Sarah's center mass as she spun from the gunman's bullet. I watched her fall, watched her die, watched that tray of food scatter across the expensive tile floor like the scattered pieces of my conscience and my faith in everything I built my life around. The gunman dropped too, killed by my first shot. But as I knelt beside Sarah in her spreading pool of blood, her final words weren't about her daughter Emma or the pain consuming her body. They were, "He paid to kill me." That's when the horrible truth crashed over me like ice water. This wasn't a failed protection detail. This was a successful execution disguised as an ambush. The aftermath of that shooting hit like a goddamn tsunami, washing away everything I thought I understood about truth and justice and the system I'd served faithfully for over 2 decades. Police, paramedics, crime scene technicians, FBI agents, all of them swarming through Meridian like ants on a disturbed hill, and through it all, David Harmon playing the shaken victim with Oscar-worthy performance. "Thank God for Mike and Tommy," he kept repeating to every badge and reporter who'd listen. "They saved my life. True heroes, both of them." But I couldn't shake Sarah's dying words, couldn't stop hearing her voice saying, "He paid to kill me," over and over like a broken record in my skull. The official story came together with suspicious speed, too fast, too clean, too convenient for everyone involved except Sarah Mitchell. Disgruntled former employee of Harmon's tech company, mentally unstable after losing his job, targeted both his former boss and the waitress because she'd served him at a company event where he was publicly humiliated and fired. Perfect narrative, wrapped up with a neat little bow that nobody questioned too hard. Elena flew in personally from the Apex offices to handle media relations, praising our heroic actions under fire, and talking about how proud the company was of our professional response to an impossible situation. Tommy was completely buying into the hero narrative, even seemed genuinely proud of what we'd done. "Hell of a thing, Mike. But we did our job exactly right. Saved the client, stopped a killer, protected innocent people. That's what we're paid for. But I kept hearing Sarah's voice, kept seeing the terror in her eyes during those final moments. I tried telling Tommy what I'd heard, what I was beginning to suspect about the whole setup. He looked at me like I'd completely lost my mind, like I was suffering from some kind of post-traumatic breakdown. Mike, you're in shock, man. That woman got caught in crossfire during a legitimate threat response. It's tragic as hell, but she wasn't the target. The shooter came for Harmon, and we stopped him. End of story. When I pressed the issue further, suggested we should investigate Sarah's claims about Harmon paying for her death, Tommy got genuinely angry with me for the first time in our partnership. Jesus Christ, Mike, let it go. We did our job, we followed protocol, we saved lives. Don't make this into something it's not. Don't dishonor that woman's memory with conspiracy theories. That night, Elena called me at my apartment, her voice carefully modulated to sound supportive while delivering what I now recognize as a clear warning. Mike, I know this is traumatic for you, but you saved David Harmon's life today, and the company is incredibly proud of you. There'll be a substantial bonus, maybe even a commendation from the security industry. But I need you to stay focused on facts, not emotional speculation that could damage everyone involved. When I mentioned Sarah's final words, the line went quiet for way too long. Mike, are you absolutely certain that's what you heard? Shock and adrenaline can play terrible tricks on memory, especially in traumatic situations. That phone call with Elena changed everything, stripping away my last illusions about who I could trust and what kind of world I'd been living in. The way she questioned what I heard, that carefully modulated tone suggesting I was unreliable, the subtle implication that trauma was making me delusional, it felt like professional gaslighting, and I started connecting dots I should have seen months earlier. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop replaying every single interaction with Harmon, every nervous glance from Sarah, every blocked phone call, every dismissive comment about her being nobody. At 3 a.m. on the third night after the shooting, I broke into my own case files, spreading everything across my kitchen table like a detective trying to solve his own life. Every note I'd made about the detail, every observation about Harmon's behavior, every red flag I'd professionally documented but personally ignored. His blocked calls that increased in frequency as the weeks went on, his dismissive attitude whenever I mentioned Sarah acting nervous, the way he said she was nobody, with such casual cruelty. Then I remembered something that made my blood freeze solid. The day Sarah slipped me that desperate note, Harmon had stepped outside for a private phone call immediately after I mentioned her strange behavior during our morning briefing. I'd thought nothing of it then, chalked it up to normal business calls, but now the timing felt sickeningly deliberate. I started digging online, looking for any connections between David Harmon and Sarah Mitchell beyond the obvious restaurant-service relationship. It took me 6 hours of methodical searching through court records, business filings, and local news archives, but I found it buried in federal court documents. Sarah Mitchell had filed a sealed witness statement in a federal investigation into Harmon's company for money laundering through restaurant transactions. The date on her statement matched exactly when she'd started acting terrified at Meridian. She wasn't just some random waitress who happened to serve our table. She was actively testifying against my client in a federal criminal case, and somehow, someone had positioned me to be in that restaurant at the exact moment a professional killer came for her. The setup was elegant, sophisticated, and I'd been the perfect unwitting weapon. A respected bodyguard accidentally killing a federal witness during a failed assassination attempt on his client. Who would ever question that narrative? The sick genius of it made me want to vomit. They'd turned me into Sarah's executioner while making me believe I was trying to save her life. The realization that I'd been used as a weapon against an innocent woman nearly broke me, but it also lit a fire in my chest that I hadn't felt since my military days. I couldn't take this to the police. They'd already closed the case, and my agency clearly had connections that reached into law enforcement. I couldn't trust Tommy, who was either too naive to see the truth or too compromised to admit it. Elena had made it clear that questioning the official narrative would destroy what was left of my career and possibly my life. But I couldn't let Sarah's death be for nothing, couldn't let her 4-year-old daughter Emma grow up never knowing that her mother died trying to do the right thing. So I made a decision that scared the hell out of me. I would try to reach Sarah's family, see if she'd left any evidence behind, anything that could expose what really happened in that restaurant. It took 3 days of careful digging through public records and social media to find Dorothy Mitchell's address in Newark. When I finally worked up the courage to knock on her door, she looked at me with a mixture of recognition and pure rage that hit me like a physical blow. "You're the one who killed my daughter," she said, voice trembling with grief and fury. Those words nearly sent me running, but I forced myself to stand there and take it. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think Sarah was murdered, and I think I was used to do it. She tried to tell me something before she died, and I need to understand what she knew." For the next 2 hours, Dorothy told me things that made my stomach turn and my hands shake with rage. Sarah had been terrified for weeks before the shooting, getting threatening phone calls at all hours, finding her car vandalized in the restaurant parking lot, discovering strange men following her home from work. She'd confided in her mother about the federal money laundering case, how Harmon's company was funneling drug money through seemingly legitimate restaurant transactions, and how she'd personally witnessed several of these exchanges during her shifts at Meridian. She'd been cooperating with federal investigators for months, but was increasingly scared that they couldn't protect her or Emma from retaliation. She said if anything happened to her, I should look for a safety deposit box at First National Bank, Dorothy told me, pulling a small brass key from her purse with shaking hands. "She gave me this 3 days before she died, said it contained insurance in case they came for her." Inside that safety deposit box was everything: dozens of photographs Sarah had secretly taken of cash exchanges, digital recordings she'd made on her phone of conversations between Harmon and known criminals, detailed handwritten notes documenting dates, times, and amounts that painted a picture of systematic money laundering operation. There was enough evidence to bury Harmon, and probably half his criminal organization. But as I studied the materials, I realized the full horrifying scope of what Sarah had uncovered, and what I was now up against. I tried to be smart about exposing the truth, approaching Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist who'd written extensively about corruption cases involving federal law enforcement. We met at a crowded Starbucks in Brooklyn, and I brought copies of everything Sarah had hidden: the photographs, recordings, handwritten notes documenting months of criminal activity. Webb seemed genuinely interested, taking detailed notes, asking sharp questions about the timeline, the players involved, the federal investigation that had gotten Sarah killed. He promised to investigate thoroughly, said he'd have preliminary findings within a week. 3 days later, he called to say he couldn't run the story. "Legal concerns," he said, but I could hear the fear trembling in his voice beneath the professional excuse. "My editor thinks the evidence isn't solid enough, too much risk of litigation." That same week, my carefully structured life began falling apart with systematic precision. My landlord suddenly decided not to renew my lease, citing building renovations that never materialized. My car was vandalized twice in 3 days, tires slashed, windows smashed, liar, spray painted across the hood. Credit cards were mysteriously maxed out with purchases I never made. Tommy stopped returning my calls entirely. Elena fired me officially, citing erratic behavior and poor judgment following traumatic incident. The message was crystal clear: shut up permanently or things get much worse. But the worst part wasn't the financial pressure or professional destruction, it was the systematic doubt they planted in everyone's mind about my mental state. Word spread through the tight-knit security community that Mike Chen had completely lost it, was fabricating elaborate conspiracy theories, couldn't be trusted with sensitive assignments. Other agencies wouldn't even take my calls. Clients who'd specifically requested me for previous jobs suddenly weren't interested. I became that guy, the one whose career ended because he couldn't handle the psychological pressure of killing someone. Meanwhile, David Harmon was promoted to CEO of an even larger tech firm, his reputation not just intact but enhanced by surviving an assassination attempt. The federal money laundering investigation mysteriously stalled, key evidence disappeared from FBI custody, witnesses refused to testify or suddenly recanted previous statements. I realized that all of Sarah's carefully gathered evidence, every photograph and recording and handwritten note, meant absolutely nothing if the system itself was completely compromised from top to bottom. I'd become radioactive in professional circles. Anyone who associated with me risked their own destruction. Dorothy Mitchell moved away with Emma, no forwarding address, no way to contact them. Even Sarah's grieving mother couldn't afford to know me anymore. Now I sit here in this studio apartment in Baltimore, working private security for shopping malls and office buildings, knowing that somewhere David Harmon sleeps peacefully in his mansion, while Sarah's daughter grows up without ever knowing her mother died a hero. 2 years later, I'm still here in Baltimore, still working mall security for $12 an hour, still jumping every time cars backfire or teenagers drop their shopping bags too loudly. The nightmares haven't stopped. Every night I see Sarah falling in slow motion, hear her last words echoing in my skull, wake up with sheets soaked in sweat, and the taste of guilt coating my mouth like copper pennies. Sometimes, in my weaker moments, I wonder if maybe I really did imagine what I heard in those final seconds, if Elena was right about trauma playing tricks on memory, if I've constructed this elaborate conspiracy to avoid accepting that I simply fucked up and killed an innocent woman. But then I remember the terror in that journalist's voice when he called to kill the story, the way Dorothy Mitchell had to disappear with her granddaughter into witness protection anonymity, the systematic precision with which my entire life was dismantled, and I know every horrible detail was real. Last month, I saw Harmon on CNN giving some bullshit interview about ethical leadership in the tech industry. Same charming smile, same confident demeanor, probably planning his next murder while talking about corporate social responsibility and giving back to communities. The interviewer called him a visionary leader who survived tragedy to build something beautiful. And I had to turn off the TV before I put my fist to the screen. You want to know the real truth about justice in America? Sometimes the bad guys don't just win, they get promoted, celebrated, held up as examples of resilience and moral courage. Sometimes good people die horrible deaths for trying to do the right thing, and the system designed to protect them becomes the weapon used to destroy them. Sometimes the people sworn to serve and protect become unwitting executioners, and they have to live with that knowledge for the rest of their miserable lives. I live with Sarah Mitchell's blood on my hands every single day, and David Harmon sleeps peacefully in his $10 million mansion knowing he orchestrated the perfect crime. The system worked exactly as it was designed to work, just not for people like Sarah, or broken-down bodyguards like me who were stupid enough to care about truth over survival. I keep copies of all Sarah's evidence in 3 different safety deposit boxes across 2 states, telling myself that someday the right person will listen, someday justice will matter again, someday her daughter will know her mother died a hero. But I'm 47 years old now, my hair's gone gray, my back aches from standing guard over department stores, and I still check my back seat every time I get in my car, because paranoia and survival instinct feel exactly the same when you've seen how deep the corruption goes.